It's been all quiet on the Western Front in 2022 with MMORPGs. Sure, there's been a few releases like Dual Universe and Fractured Online, but nothing major. Luckily, that is where the indie scene does come in, particularly with the Kickstarter title that recently released, Genfanad, standing for Generic Fantasy Adventure. Genfanad takes inspiration from RuneScape Classic and acts as a spiritual successor to it. From visuals to common gameplay elements, the game truly looks and feels like the first iteration of RuneScape all those years ago. However, Genfanad does plan to implement features and gameplay elements that will have it stand on its own as a unique and different experience. So naturally, as an MMO fan, I had been following this game for a while and was eager to hop in when it released. Now, a few days after launch, is it worth checking out? Let's get into it.
Join a world where most people stand around in banks all day. The corporation is seeking profit, and you are how we'll get it.
Genfanad, or however you say it because I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it, is a 3D isometric MMORPG. The visual style of the game goes for a more retro style, using simple polygonal graphics to represent its environments, as well as using sprites for characters and NPCs. Even though it's simple, it does work for what the game is going for, which is that retro look and feel. Unfortunately, that does mean it will turn off those who are looking for a more visually appealing game. Once you've created your character at the website and log in, which admittedly is a bit of a weird process, you will be plopped into the game's tutorial. Here you can customize how your character looks by interacting with the mirror. Once you've dolled up your character, you then play the lengthy tutorial. The tutorial is unfortunately a bit of a mess, and most of the player base agrees that it needs to be toned down a bit. Don't get me wrong though, it's not that it's difficult or anything, it's just a bit lengthy with its fetch quest that it presents near the end, treating the tutorial more as an actual quest rather than a simple tutorial, which is a bit confusing. I understand the developers wanted a more engaging tutorial to teach players the ins and outs of their game by giving them tasks that would make them learn those mechanics. However, that can be taught through quests outside of the tutorial, much like what they did with the butchering quest given right outside of it. Tutorial grievances aside, once you've properly been unleashed into the world, the game starts proper, where you can start leveling your skills, gather resources, complete quests, socialize with other players, and engage in combat. Progression in the game is similar to other skill-based MMORPGs, where you have a number of professions that each level up separately. The skills are separated into different types depending on what the skill does. The combat skills are Vitality, Attack, Strength, Defense, Ranged, and Sorcery. Processing includes Cooking, Forging, Artistry, Tailoring, and Whittling. Support has Evocation, Survival, and Piety, with the gathering skills finally having Logging, Mining, Botany, and Butchery. For the most part, each skill is self-explanatory. Cooking allows you to cook food so you can eat and heal yourself when fighting monsters. Vitality is your maximum hit points. There are skills that don't have a purpose as of yet at the time of this video, like Survival or Piety, but they can be leveled up to get a head up for when those skills do get implemented. Combat in the game is probably one feature most players who never came from the retro scene will have to get used to. Combat is a click and watch sort of experience. Your character will fight the monster you click on, and you watch and hope your character defeats it. Obviously, you can influence combat by training your skills to deal more damage, wearing better gear to defend enemy attacks, or have higher hit points, but once combat begins with a creature, that's kinda all there is to it. Unless you want to run away, which can only be done once combat has gone on at least 3 rounds, there is nothing else you can do in terms of engagement, at least not yet. Ranged and magic combat is a bit funny looking, since it's basically just you sitting there while you fire off something, with most cases having the creature stare at you while you kill it because there is a block separating you.
This is bullshit.
Fortunately, the game has room for improvement to add flavor to combat eventually, but for right now though, it's an incredibly simple combat system. On the flip side, questing and skilling is where the game truly shines. Let's talk about questing first. I've been meaning to avoid name-dropping RuneScape a lot in this video, but it's a bit unavoidable when it comes to questing because it's just as strong here as it is in RuneScape. Questing in Genfanad will have you puzzle solving, fetching items, crafting, defeating enemies, NPCs and exploring the game's world. Some quests will boil down to kill X monsters, gather Y items, and talk to Z NPC, but others are a bit more involved. For example, the Royal Distractions quest has you helping the Princess of Zamock, who is looking to find something that she is good at. The NPCs in the quest all have funny and witty dialogue, much like most of the game's NPCs, which is a joy to read through. The quest will involve several of your skills and ultimately rewards you with a hefty amount of experience in said skills, and at some point, it will unlock the ability to use the castle anvils, which is a pretty significant unlock to train forging. Training skills is also a joy to do in Genfanad. Much of it is grindy, where you are resource gathering or creating components, but it all leads to bigger numbers and more stuff you can do. Hoarding a large number of items to either convert into useful components for other skills or to sell to other players is what made the gameplay loop of those retro MMORPGs so magical, as well as each game's community. Genfanad's community is rather small, but it is growing, and everyone I've personally come across so far has been friendly or helpful. After all, most of the audience for this game is MMO veterans who missed that embracing community. All we are missing right now is a dedicated free market spot somewhere in the world to buy and sell everything we hoard. Overall, Genfanad has a lot of promise in the MMORPG scene, but I think that's the major gotcha when it comes to how I can truly describe it. It's promising. At the time of this video, the game doesn't necessarily have a ton of content to experience just yet. Many of the skills only have a few recipes to craft. Combat is pretty bare bones, only a few spells exist to cast, there's only a couple of musical tracks to listen to, only a handful of quests to complete. I think you get the picture. Thankfully, there is content coming that is going to be released, as the developers do hope to get a routine where there is weekly updates, even if it's something small per week. Other small gripes I would have are things like the UI could use some cleaning up, even if it's adjustable. Obviously, they need to fix up some of the glitches and bugs that players are running across, like shown experience values being awarded when completing quests, or just quality of life fixes like being able to accurately click items more successfully. Personally, I think the biggest hurdle that needs to be achieved here is distinguishing themselves further from the game that inspired it. RuneScape is a great game, but Genfanad shouldn't be afraid to implement some of their own ideas. There are some things in the game that are different, like learning recipes through consumable items, but I want to see things like an actual party system, or more unique skills, like maybe a sub-skill in attack for each weapon type. Things that will truly set itself apart from its predecessor. I'm confident that it will be able to stand on its own 2 feet as time goes on though. So let's start wrapping things up, shall we? Genfanad is a free-to-play game that will eventually have a subscription service similar to other games, but for now it is free to play with no cash shop or microtransactions in general right from the website's browser, so no download required either. If you like the old days of RuneScape, then you will love Genfanad, as it's a love letter to that game with their own unique features that sets itself apart. The game has a very light sense of humor compared to other games in the genre that have a very serious story or tone in nature. Much of what I experienced here had jokes thrown in or was fourth wall breaking to give a more comedic tone than its competitors. The community and developers are very friendly and embrace new players as they come in and experience the game. The developers in particular are open to feedback and suggestions, so they are listening to their community. Unfortunately, the game has a pretty poor UI currently that is thankfully scalable in the options menu, but it needs some cleaning up, namely how the menu operates. Things like being able to either move your inventory, chat bar, or stats buttons would be a godsend, but currently all the buttons are kind of in weird spots. Since the game is brand new, that does mean there will be some launch day jank still present. Expect to find placeholders or minor bugs that can impede some things as you play, but hopefully it's nothing too game-breaking. The game is modeled after a retro skill-based MMORPG. If you are looking for something more action-packed or modern, Genfanad isn't really what you are looking for. Lastly, the game is a bit light on content currently, but obviously that will be fixed with updates. What is here is definitely a lot of fun to experience, so hold tight and wait for more to come. That's all for my thoughts on Genfanad, everyone. For those who are looking into this game, are you going to give it a try? Let me know in the comments section below about your thoughts on Genfanad. Don't forget to like the video to help push it into the algorithm and get more eyes on this indie MMO scene. Subscribe to the channel to support my content, follow all my social media down below, and I'll see you in the next one.